combination of the passion for music had left me. I could not, you know, find the honest passion for singing. And because of that, I was stepping into some other, dare I say, party behaviors to augment my frustrations. And then I think my voice was also suffering. I think everything started to suffer for me.
Steve Perry had a voice that could shake arenas and move millions. As the electrifying frontman of Journey, he rose to dizzying heights of fame and success. But behind the curtain of stardom lay a deeply human story, one marked by dreams and devastating heartache. This is the tale of a small-town boy with a golden voice who reached the pinnacle of rock and roll only to be tested by crushing loss and years of silence. He gave the world music to believe in, even as his own faith was tested time and again. It's a journey of passion and pain, of love found and tragically lost. In the tragic life of Steve Perry, the spotlight shines not only on the triumphs, but on the heartbreaking cost of a life dedicated to music. Stephen Ray Perry was born in a small California farm town, an only child with music in his blood. His father, a singer and radio station owner, filled Steve's early years with melody. But when Steve was 8, his parents separated, and his father's voice faded from home. Lonely and heartbroken, young Steve clung to music for comfort. On his 12th birthday, his mother gave him a tiny gold musical note pendant, a symbol of her belief in his dream. That same year, Steve heard Sam Cooke's silky voice on the radio, and something sparked inside him. In that moment, he knew he was meant to sing. As a teenager, Steve sang at every opportunity: choir, local bands, talent shows, chasing a dream that felt a world away. His mother Mary was his rock, cheering him on at each small gig. By his early 20s, he was forming bands and pouring his soul into music. But success didn't come easy. Band after band fell apart, testing his faith. In one promising group, Steve finally felt on the verge of a breakthrough. Then tragedy struck. His bassist and dear friend was killed in a car accident. Devastated, Steve felt his world crash down. Grief left him questioning if all the sacrifice was worth it. For a moment, he wondered if he should give up music entirely. Back home, Steve struggled to find direction. The future he had dreamed of seemed to be slipping away. But Mary refused to let her son's gift go silent. One day, as Steve wrestled with sorrow, a phone call came that would change everything. Journey, a San Francisco rock band, wanted Steve to audition after hearing a demo of his soulful voice. At first, Steve hesitated. His heart was still heavy, and starting over was daunting. But his mother gently urged him, "This is your chance. You need to try." With her blessing and hope in his pocket, Steve Perry took a leap of faith. In late 1977, he stepped on stage with Journey for the first time, unaware he was at the dawn of a meteoric rise. Joining Journey launched Steve Perry into a dazzling new world. At first, some longtime fans weren't sure about this soulful newcomer, but his extraordinary voice quickly won them over. With his soaring tenor ringing out night after night, Journey's popularity exploded. By the early 1980s, they were one of the biggest rock bands on the planet, selling out arenas from coast to coast. And at the heart of it all was Steve, pouring every ounce of emotion into each performance. On stage, Steve was a force of nature. He could hold a crowd of 50,000 in the palm of his hand with a single note. His voice, at once powerful and heartbreakingly tender, struck a chord deep in listeners' souls. Fans would belt out lyrics with tears in their eyes as Steve sang ballads like "Open Arms" and "Faithfully," his vocals full of yearning and sincerity. Up-tempo anthems like "Don't Stop Believin' had entire stadiums jumping in unison, fueled by the hope and energy in Steve's tone. Critics and peers began calling him the Voice for his unmatched range and emotive delivery. Each song he touched became a piece of himself shared with millions. For Steve, these years were a whirlwind of triumphs. Album after album went platinum. He even released a hit solo single, "Oh Sherry," revealing how deeply he could channel his own feelings into music. Once a kid singing along to the radio in rural California, Steve was now living out the dream on rock's grandest stages. Yet, amid the screaming fans and the bright lights of fame, he remained a humble figure off stage, soft-spoken, shy about the adulation. From the outside, it seemed Steve Perry had everything: talent, success, adoring crowds. But as Journey's fame reached its peak, the pressures on Steve were quietly growing. Night after night of high-octane performances, and the weight of expectation began to press down. Unseen by the public, cracks were forming beneath the surface of the band's fairy tale run. And for Steve, the toll of living his dream was about to come due in ways no one expected. At the height of Journey's fame, Steve's life looked like a dream, but behind closed doors, the pressures were mounting. Years of non-stop touring were wearing him down. Each night, he pushed his voice to its limit, and the strain began to show. Off-stage, the endless travel left him with no time to rest and no chance at a normal life. The weight of being the Voice grew heavier with every show. Cracks also began to show in Steve's personal life. His longtime girlfriend, Sherry Swafford, immortalized in his song "Oh Sherry," could no longer endure the strain of his career. By 1985, their relationship fell apart, leaving Steve more alone than ever, just as the demands of superstardom intensified. And then came a devastating blow no success could shield him from. His mother, Mary, fell gravely ill. Even amid recording sessions and tour dates, Steve would fly back to California whenever he could to sit by his mother's bedside. One day, he'd be singing to thousands. The next, he'd be holding Mary's hand as she fought for her life. Mary's condition worsened through 1986, and Steve had to watch his guiding light fade away. Journey's progress ground to a halt as he rushed home repeatedly. Frustration grew within the band, tensions flared, and even some longtime members left as things started to unravel. Before the new album was finished, Mary passed away, leaving Steve heartbroken. At her funeral, the fearless rock star was just a son saying goodbye to his mom, barely able to finish the song through his tears. After Mary's death, something essential in Steve changed. On stage, he still hit the notes and flashed the smile, but the spark was fading. Every performance felt harder than the last, and he was burning out. Music, his one true love, was starting to feel like a burden. Steve Perry was reaching a breaking point, and as 1987 dawned, the unthinkable loomed. The voice that had carried so many might soon fall silent. In 1987, at the peak of Journey's success, Steve Perry did the unthinkable. He walked away. After the exhausting Raised on Radio tour, he finally reached his limit. One evening, with his voice tired and his heart heavy, Steve sat down with his bandmates and told them he couldn't continue. The constant pressure, the grief, the endless obligations, it had drained the life out of him. He needed to stop or risk losing himself completely. The announcement stunned the music world. Journey, riding high on a decade of hits, suddenly went silent. Fans were bewildered and heartbroken. How could the iconic voice of "Don't Stop Believin'" simply vanish? Rumors flew. Some blamed ego clashes within the band. Others wondered if his voice was shot or if he was secretly ill. The truth was both simpler and more tragic. Steve Perry was emotionally and physically spent. At first, Steve intended to step back only temporarily, a hiatus to recharge. But as days turned into months, it became clear he was in no rush to return. In private, the man who had given so much of himself on stage now struggled with profound emptiness. He later likened his state to a form of PTSD. Even hearing music on the radio could trigger waves of anxiety and painful nostalgia. For years, Steve had poured every ounce of his soul into song. Now, with nothing left to give, he retreated from the world of music entirely. Journey, as a band, was left in limbo. Without their signature voice, the remaining members drifted to separate projects, unsure if they'd ever reunite that magic. Meanwhile, Steve sought refuge out of the spotlight. He slipped into a quiet, anonymous life, far from the roar of arenas and adoring fans. No farewell tours, no grand explanations. He was just gone. For the first time in his adult life, Steve Perry lived in complete silence, leaving millions of fans with a burning question: would they ever hear that magnificent voice again? In the months and years after leaving Journey, Steve Perry lived in a world far removed from spotlights and stadiums. He retreated to quiet anonymity, finally free to mourn and heal. The grief over his mother's death still weighed heavily on him. Having lost the woman who had been his guiding light, Steve grappled with a profound emptiness. In a sense, he was also mourning the loss of his bandmates and the life he'd known in Journey. One day, he was the voice of America's biggest rock band. The next, he was just a man alone with his thoughts. In this isolation, Steve tried to rediscover who he was without a microphone in hand. At first, he avoided music entirely. Picking up a guitar or turning on the radio reminded him of all he had left behind, and it hurt too much. He busied himself with ordinary things, spending time with old friends and walking around unnoticed, letting himself blend into small-town life. To those who knew him then, he seemed like a wounded soul in need of time and peace. As years passed, the raw pain slowly began to dull. By the early 1990s, Steve felt faint echoes of the passion he once had for music. Alone at home, he found himself humming melodies and jotting down lyrics again. It was tentative, but a sign of life returning to the part of him he'd shut away. In 1994, 7 years after walking away, Steve finally stepped back into a recording studio. The result was a new solo album. When it was released, fans rejoiced to hear that familiar voice again. Steve even ventured out on a solo tour, performing live for the first time in years. It wasn't the arena frenzy of Journey's heyday, but it was meaningful, proof that his love for music had endured. That spark set the stage for another astonishing turn of events. In 1996, Steve Perry reunited with Journey's classic lineup to record a new album, bringing him back with the band he had once left behind. For fans, it was a dream come true. Steve Perry was back with Journey, singing his heart out once more. Their new album was a success. For a brief moment, the fairy tale felt back on track. But just as quickly as the reunion came, fate dealt Steve another cruel twist. This second departure marked the beginning of a silence that would stretch over 2 decades. Journey continued on with new singers, but Steve Perry vanished from the music scene. Fans, left with only old records and memories, wondered how someone with such a gift could vanish. With no answers, speculation ran wild. Some said his voice and health never fully recovered. Others thought he was simply done with the spotlight, whether from heartbreak or a desire for a quiet life. With Steve offering no public explanation, he became an enigma, a legend retreated into the shadows. Over the years, there were a few flickers of hope. In 2005, Steve made a brief appearance to accept Journey's Hollywood Walk of Fame honor, though he did not sing. Then, in 2014, fans were stunned when he stepped on stage unannounced with the band Eels at a small club show. For the first time in ages, that iconic voice rang out live once more. Videos of the surprise performance went viral, and suddenly everyone was asking, was Steve Perry finally coming back? Steve quickly downplayed it, calling it a one-off moment of joy, not a true return. As the years went on, Journey was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2017. Steve did attend the ceremony and gave a short speech, but once again chose not to perform with the band. To many, it felt like the door had truly closed on that chapter. By now, a whole generation knew Steve's voice only from old recordings, and a true comeback seemed more and more unlikely. Still, a loyal part of the fan base never stopped believing that someday Steve would find his way back to music. Yet, none of them knew that behind the scenes, a deeply personal story was unfolding, one that would finally give Steve a reason to sing again. Away from the spotlight, Steve Perry struggled not just with the silence, but with his very sense of self. For years, he had been Steve Perry of Journey, a rock icon with a clear purpose. Now, living an ordinary life, he often wondered who he was without the music. He had lived the dream of dreams. What was left for him to do? In the late 1990s and 2000s, Steve tried to make peace with a simpler existence. He attempted to embrace being ordinary. He cut his long hair short, dressed casually, and went about his days like any other person. Friends recall seeing him at local coffee shops or baseball games, content to blend into the crowd. On some days, he felt relief to be free of fame's pressures. On others, he felt a deep ache, a void where singing and performing used to be. Physical pain had pushed him off the stage, and it continued to linger in his private life. After leaving Journey, Steve eventually underwent the hip replacement surgery on his own terms, recovering quietly. But as he grew older, new health challenges arose. In 2013, a routine checkup led to a melanoma diagnosis. Caught early, it was removed with surgery, but the scare shook him. Facing his mortality again forced Steve to confront all those years spent in retreat. He asked himself, was he truly content never to sing again? The honest answer was no. He missed the music. He missed sharing his voice, even if the idea of returning still scared him. Life, however, had one more twist in store. In 2011, through an unlikely introduction, Steve met Kelly Nash, a vibrant, big-hearted woman who was quietly battling cancer. Against the odds, they fell deeply in love. For the first time in decades, Steve allowed himself to be vulnerable and truly care for someone. But their time together was painfully short. Kelly's cancer returned aggressively. Steve devoted himself to her care, finding a renewed sense of purpose, even as he braced for a devastating goodbye. In loving Kelly, Steve relearned that life was precious and that love was worth every risk, even if heartbreak would be the price. Before she passed away in late 2012, Kelly asked Steve for one promise. In her final moments, Kelly Nash made a simple plea to the man she loved. She told Steve, "If something happens to me, promise me you won't go back into isolation." Through tears, he promised her he wouldn't. Those words, that promise, would become his guiding light in the darkness to come. Kelly passed away on December 14, 2012. Steve was shattered, but even in his sorrow, he couldn't forget her final wish. Eventually, Steve began to make music again. In 2015, he built himself a home studio and started writing songs in private. He poured his heartbreak into the music, the pain of losing Kelly, and a hope that something beautiful might rise from sorrow. It wasn't easy. Some days, Steve's fear and self-doubt nearly won. He hadn't released new music in decades, and he was plagued by doubts that no one would care, or that his voice was no longer the same. Whenever those fears arose, he thought of Kelly and the promise and kept going. He named the album Traces, a tribute to the indelible marks left by the people he'd loved and lost. Finally, in October 2018, Steve Perry broke his long silence and released Traces. After nearly 25 years, Steve's voice was heard anew. Fans rejoiced to hear that familiar voice again, a bit deeper, but still unmistakably Steve Perry. And Steve himself felt alive once more. The songs brimmed with love and loss. Most of all, Steve felt alive again. He was doing what he never thought he would, with Kelly's memory guiding every note. With Traces, Steve Perry fulfilled the promise he made. He stepped back into the light, not as the arena rock god of the 1980s, but as a humbled man. It was a triumphant, yet bittersweet moment. As the world welcomed Steve Perry back, one question remained. After all the pain and all the lost years, had he finally found peace within himself? Today, Steve Perry's legacy as one of rock's greatest voices is secure. His songs continue to inspire new generations. But beyond the accolades and Hall of Fame honors, Steve's journey left him with reflections deeper than any hit record. He often acknowledges that stepping away from Journey all those years ago was something he had to do for his sanity, even if it meant sacrificing precious time. He realizes those decades of silence gave him a chance to heal and live life on his own terms, but they were also years he can never get back. Steve admits that part of him will always wonder what might have been. Yet he also knows that the path he took, however painful, shaped the person he is now. He found love outside of music, endured heartbreaking losses, and learned that life goes on beyond the spotlight. He discovered his identity was more than fame. These lessons came at a high price, but left him wiser and more humble. And what of peace? After keeping his promise and releasing Traces, Steve appears more at peace with himself. Singing again on his own terms reconnected him with a part of his soul he thought lost. There's a new calm in his voice when he talks about the past. He doesn't shy away from the pain. Instead, he honors the memories of those he lost by sharing their stories in song. The scars of loss will never disappear. He will always miss his mother and Kelly. And he may always feel a pang when he hears Journey carry on without him. But he has made peace with those scars. They are part of him, etched into every note he sings, and he accepts that. In the end, Steve Perry found something more enduring than fame. He found himself. He lived through soaring highs and crushing lows, but never lost his capacity to love, to hope, and ultimately, to sing again. His journey shows that even the brightest stars can fall into darkness, and that they can rise again when guided by love and perseverance. Steve once sang, "Don't stop believin'," and in his own way, he never did. After everything, the glory, the heartbreak, the silence, and the song, Steve Perry returned to the light on his own terms. Perhaps that is the true triumph of his tragic story. After so much pain and lost time, he rediscovered his voice, and with it a measure of peace. And that hard-won peace may be his greatest legacy of all. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe.